Do you have any other tip, any other recommendation that you can give to people who are learning English?
Are you talking about pronunciation or just in general to learn English?
Like in general, maybe like something that you consider like important.
Okay, that's a good question. I think read in English. I mean, and I think that's something that a lot of people start with, right, is reading. But I feel like that is a way that you get to learn a lot of vocabulary and sayings, and it's kind of nice because it's a little more controlled, right? You're not in a live situation where you're speaking to someone and maybe have that the nerves of speaking with another speaker. It's like you have the time to be like, okay, I don't know what this word is and let me look it up, or what is this saying, and that's like a way to learn. And I feel like it's a way where you can feel very comfortable learning. And yeah, I just feel like growing up I learned a lot about English, like a lot of English words and expressions from reading. Like that was
Uh-huh.
one of my principal just like sources of English learning was from reading books and poetry and but also find whatever kind of reading you're interested in
Uh-huh.
English, and I think that can help you a lot. um but that being said, like at least for me learning Spanish, a big part of improving my spoken Spanish is just speaking
Uh-huh.
with whenever you can, with native speakers, with non-native, just finding that time to practice. And it's just because it is different. Sometimes, I'll read out loud by myself in Spanish, or I'll talk to myself in Spanish, by myself. But
Yeah.
it's different, speaking to yourself in private than having a conversation with somebody. It is very different. Sometimes the nerves come into play. Sometimes, you just, I don't know, forget words or whatever it is. But that practice, it helps a lot. For example, speaking with Alex has helped me so much improve my Spanish, my spoken Spanish. So I think, yeah, pair, that like reading part with if
Uh-huh.
just conversations if you want to also improve the oral part of your English skills.
I agree with you. I think that like the practice makes a great difference.
Yeah.
And if you have like the chance to practice with, as you mentioned, with someone that maybe is better than you, maybe with someone who has like
Yeah.
a lower level, like all this kind of practice can be very useful.
Yes.
And and especially if you really want to like to learn, you need to like to make a great effort to achieve this goal, because learning a language, I think in my opinion, it's not so easy, or it, at least for example, like when we go to school, sometimes we just go and we study just the night before an exam, and sometimes that's enough to pass or to get a good grade. But the when we talk about languages, I think that it's not enough just like going trying to review some vocabulary before having a conversation. I think that you really need to like to focus your attention on trying to learn as much as you can.
Definitely. And I will say the same thing happens in the United States. There's so many of us, I mean, me included for some of my classes, it'd be like just the night before, or even, whatever, the hours before an exam or something you're studying. And then you like, yeah, you cram. That's how you say it in English. You cram your brain with all of this
Uh-huh.
information last minute, but then like it kind of goes away afterwards, right? You have it long enough to do well on your tests or your assignments or whatever, and then it's kind of gone. And it's interesting because Spanish is a very popular language course for
Uh-huh.
high schoolers in the United States. You have to, in high school, like everyone is required to take a language, and a lot of people take Spanish because they're like, oh, this is useful, which is, people are like, there's a lot of Spanish speakers in the United States, which is true. And we're, close to Mexico and Latino America. And so like a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I'm gonna take Spanish. But it's also like high school Spanish classes are kind of a joke, because it's kind of this idea that like, yeah, either you don't study well, or even though like the classes don't teach you that well,
Uh-huh.
they're just not a very high quality language classes. And so
Uh-huh.
um yeah, the same thing happens here too. Like if someone wants to learn Spanish, just like if someone in Mexico wants to learn English, they really need to make a big personal effort, right, to
Uh-huh.
make that happen. Because sometimes those classes are just, yeah, not going to do it.
Yeah, I think that's something that U.S. and Mexico have in common. Like learning languages and at school is not like the best way to do it.
Yeah, university might be a little bit better. and even then it depends on the university. I feel like my classes haven't been the best, but for example, my husband had some good language classes. So university might be a bit better for language learning, but I think in any case, if you want to learn a language, like you have to put in personal time and effort, right? With the reading, with finding people to speak with, and also something I didn't mention earlier, but which is also great too, is listening to podcasts, audiobooks, songs, watching movies, any kind of like input in that language, oral, written, like auditory, all of that is going to help a lot too. So yeah.
Thank you very much for all your recommendations, for like all the information that you share with us about like this part of learning English, or how is like this experience of using English in the US. And now changing a little the topic, like talking a little more about like the culture in the US. For example, like if we want to visit the US, maybe like Texas or another part, do you have any recommendation for us? Something that maybe we should try to do, something that we shouldn't do to avoid trouble?
That's a good question. Are we talking about in speaking English, or just like in general with like maybe cultural differences, or
Yeah, it's more like about like cultural differences.
cultural differences? I'm trying to think. Okay, one thing that it makes me kind of sad, but is the case in the United States, is physical contact. So I feel like in Mexico, people are they just love their physical contact, and I think it's so sweet. They give each other hugs and like kisses on the cheeks every time they see each other. And yeah, I love that kind of like warmth that comes from the culture. But here, like a lot of people are like, I need my space, like my personal space. Like unless you're really good friends, sometimes you don't hug. The kisses on the cheek isn't very common. I mean, within the Latino communities, it's more. But even then, like I noticed, like some Hispanics who have lived here for a while, like they don't always kiss you on the cheeks. They don't always give you the hugs, because they've kind of maybe become more Americanized, right? Where it's like more about just like personal space and just not as physically affectionate. So that would be one thing to look out for. I mean, yeah, and obviously it depends on the person, depends on your friends. There might be some who are like who would really love that contact, and who are maybe more comfortable with it, but there are definitely other people. It's like the kind of traditional greeting, right? If you're meeting someone, is a handshake, and even that seems formal sometimes. A lot of people are just like, hi. They just kind of put the hand up, and that's the extent of any kind of physical gestures when you see somebody. So it does depend on the person. So that is one thing. I'm trying to think. There's some similarities. There's one similarity I thought of, like if you want to get someone's attention, you say excuse me. Just like you'd say disculpe, señor, something like that. The señor and señora part, that's interesting in the United States. So here in Texas, like a lot of people say sir and ma'am, and they see it as a sign of respect. It's like, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir. I didn't really grow up doing it because my parents didn't really do it, but a lot of people do it here, and they think it's really respectful and kind and educated, right? But there's other parts of the country where people are like, don't say that, like, don't call me ma'am, like you make me feel old, right? So it's kind of a cultural thing within the United States, right? Like in Texas, it seemed like it's a show of respect, right? But in other states, it's not used as commonly, or people are like you're being like too formal with me, you don't call me sir, don't call me ma'am. So that's like it's kind of like a linguistic cultural difference between states. So that's, I think generally people would understand that you're trying to be respectful, but there might be people who don't like it, or it's just maybe not as common in other places in the US. So that's one thing. Let me think. See if I can think of anything else. Yeah.
And just for example, and now that you mentioned like this part, that maybe sometimes people like they prefer like to respect their own personal space, and for example, like if I go to the US and I am lost in the street and I want to get some help from another person, how easy can it be to get help, or will it be something difficult to ask for someone in the street like for help?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the state a lot, and the city. So I feel like here in Texas, it would be easy. I feel like most people are like pretty friendly. They're the South in general is kind of known for hospitality, and of course it depends on person to person, and just just yeah, it depends. But in general, I think if you're like, hey, excuse me, like, do you know where this is? People will be like, oh yeah, sure, like it's just a couple blocks down, or go down the street, whatever. So yeah, you can say excuse me, or it's like, oh hey, I don't know. Maybe oh hey isn't the best way to lead in. Probably excuse me is still the best. But I feel like generally people are happy to help, and but and I don't know this firsthand because I haven't been there, but like for example, New York has a reputation for like having people who are kind of rude, So if you were to stop someone on the street and ask for directions, they'd be like no, I don't have time, for this, or maybe they would just ignore you, or but maybe make a mean face. Like I don't know if this is personally true. Like it's a stereotype that I've heard and maybe seen in movies and stuff. So yeah, but and they say generally like in the East, people are maybe not as I wouldn't say not as friendly, but just not as open to strangers is kind of what I've heard, and interacting with people that they don't know. So yeah, it varies on state to state. There was something else I thought with that, and I can't remember what it was. If I remember, I'll mention it. But that yeah, it just depends on the state you're in, and definitely like yeah, I'm sure there are people in the East, who will be more open and talking. It yeah, depends on the person, depends on the state. But I think if you're lost, you can probably try to talk to somebody, and you'll find help from someone. So yeah.
Because for example, here in Mexico, like in those kind of situations, especially when you need to talk to someone that you don't know, I think that normally we try to get more physical contact with people that we don't know, that with people that we do know. For example, if you're in the street, like in this case, that you need some help, that you want to ask for maybe an address or something like that, maybe it's very common that you approach to one person and you say something like, "Excuse me," and maybe you try to put like your hand on the shoulder of the person, or maybe you try to touch the hand of the person, like you try to have like this little gentle touch, maybe like to indicate that maybe you are not like a dangerous person. And normally we do it with that intention, but I think that maybe in the US, maybe that wouldn't be like a good option, right?
Probably not. Sadly, here I think people would see it as a sign like you are a dangerous person, like you're invading my personal space and I don't even know who you are, kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's such a sweet gesture. And I kind of wish it was like that here, but no, I think here you probably you honestly even keep a physical distance. Like don't get too physically even close to that person, like when you're standing or whatever. Because sometimes people, yeah, they're just kind of like wary of people they don't know. They're just kind of maybe more just generally suspicious. Not always, but if you were to touch somebody, like I think if you were to touch somebody like and you just like couldn't get their attention, maybe get them like and they're like turned around, you can maybe like touch their back, like excuse me, and that's probably the most physical contact. You just touch their back just because maybe they're not hearing you, right?
Yeah.
But aside from that, yeah, probably no hand holding, no like shoulder touching for like a long period of time. Yeah, that'd probably not be taken as well here.
Okay, I think that's
yeah.
It's good. It's good to know that because I think that at least for Mexican people, I think that's something very common, like having like this little physical contact with the
Yeah.
person. Of course, like trying to be respectful all the time, but
Right.
yeah, like maybe if we don't know like these kind of things, maybe we can have a problem with another person without even know what is
Right.
the
Like
problem,
what it
right?
is that you did wrong. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Okay. So well, thank you very much, Rachel, for this, like for first for accepting this invitation, for being talking to us, for giving us like your opinions on this information, like some of your tips, like this part about like the pronunciation was like really good. I think that's something that people should try to practice at home. And that song that you learned when you were a child, that was also very. I think that's also very useful. I think that maybe we should try to practice with this kind of music too. But thank you very much, Rachel, for accepting this invitation.
Of course, Alex, thank you so much for having me on the show. I've yeah, just really enjoyed our conversation, and I really hope, yeah, something that I said is helpful, to the listeners out there. I'm really excited about this show. I think you're doing a great job with this podcast. So yeah, just my kudos, my compliments to you.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and I hope that you can be with us again in the future.
Yes, I would love to. That would be great.
Excellent. Okay, so okay, guys, thank you very much for listening to us. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation, that you can take advantage of all this conversation, and remember that you can listen to this podcast in Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcast too, and Apple. And I see you again next week with a new episode. Bye bye.
Bye.